So I got interested in growing in the city in all sorts of ways. I'm involved a bit in Sheffield, where I'm working with a primary school, and we got an uplift grant from the lottery to install a polytunnel in a field next to the school. It's a school in a very poor area, and food poverty and insecurity is one of the key issues. And in fact, a lot of our volunteers at the school have been playing an enormously important role in providing food for the food insecure over the last 18 months. Also, I got involved a bit in Grow at Totteridge Academy, and I hope George Lamb will come online in due course, as he's one of the speakers. They have a 6-acre field next to the school, and growing and well-being are integrated into how the school operates. Our next speaker, Kath Rosen, sadly can't be with us today, but will be with us tomorrow. And her replacement fell sick this morning, so we just have 3 speakers. So we've got Paul Smyth, we've got Kath Dalmeny, and we've got George Lamb as our speakers. And I'm crossing my fingers that our other speakers will be online by the time that Kath has finished. Kath is the CEO of Sustain. I took a look at Sustain this morning on their website, and apart from anything else, it is the most amazing aggregation of food-focused organizations that are doing things for both nutrition, food security, and climate change. On their campaigning, for example, they're doing all sorts of things, including a real bread campaign, a network of over 3,000 food growing spaces, which I guess is relevant today under capital growth, and lots of other things. So, Kath, from your perspective as one of the leaders of sustainability in the UK, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what Sustain does, and why food growing in the city is important for our future?
Yes, and thank you very much indeed, Michael. But also, can I ask how long I should talk for? Because this is my life's work, so I can go on about it.
Yes.
And I want to make sure that I stick to the things that you would like me to cover.
Yes, if I can't find my other speakers, then I have to go on for a long time.
Well, I hope then, in which case I can usurp the space just to be enthusiastic more than anything.
So go on for as long as you feel. I will then ask you some questions and also invite the audience to ask.
Also, as people come on board, well, I do really welcome audience participation in this. Isn't it weird that we can't see each other, my friends? In food, the best thing about food, apart from obviously it tasting wonderful, is also the conviviality. So anytime we get a chance very soon to have this conversation in person, preferably in a city farm or near a food growing space, the better, because those are where ideas and love and connection flows. I will tell you a little bit about myself in relation to Sustain, because Sustain is a collection of a lot of different types of projects and campaigns around healthy and sustainable food. But the food growing and food production in cities is one of the most vibrant aspects of what we do. And on a personal basis, everybody at Sustain, yes, we work in an office and we get lots of campaigning done, but we're also connected to real food and real activity too. So my claim to fame on that front is that I work with growing communities in Hackney. I'm a Hackney girl. So we run an over £1 million turnover fruit and veg business as a social enterprise. So I'm not benefiting from that financially, but to try and get really good food into the city, grown well, traded well, helping the farmers, helping people to eat well and make that affordable as well. So we're trying to connect into the climate imperative that we're all dealing with as well at the moment, so that the food growing is feeding people in a way that will also look after the land and nature. So that's one thing, is some of that is food grown in the city, but some of that is traded with farmers outside London. In London itself, we run the Capital Growth Network, which Michael mentioned, which is 3,000 community food growing spaces, gardens all over the city, where tens of thousands of people are growing food, enjoying good company, enjoying fresh food, and reconnecting with where their food comes from. And under the leadership now of 3 successive mayors of London, we've managed to run that food growing programme and to liberate the land in order to make that happen. One of the things that communities locally find really difficult to do is they might see a piece of land out of their window, otherwise they cycle past it or from the bus. It's the only way they can look down over a wall. They can't get access to that land. And if they approach the landowner, who is that? And will they trust a community group to take it on? And has it got any water? And is there a gate? Is there somewhere to store tools? It's only when we approached that more systematically and said, actually, we're going to go in with the community group to talk to the landowner and help to liberate those kind of pieces of land and the support, whether it be in a social housing space, on utility land, a land next to a canal, the land in a school, that gave the confidence to the landowner or the facilities manager to say, yes, that's okay. So we started, and I want to talk about ambition, we started about 10 years ago when there were a few lovely food growing spaces around London. And we said, what would it look like if we set an ambition for there to be these food growing spaces in every borough? And for that landowners to see it as a normal thing to do, to allow their land to be used in that way by the communities who wanted to grow food together. So we set the ambition 10 years ago of saying, could we help create 2012 new food growing spaces? By the end of 2012, it was the Olympics year. We used that as an excuse. And we got there. And we knew when we set the target, it was utterly ridiculous. But we said, who are we to say it's ridiculous? Let's set an ambition and really go for it. And my wonderful colleagues who ran the campaign systematically went to landowners, to social housing organisers, to utility managers, to local authorities, the people who hold the land, and said, this is the bit you can do. This is the part you can play. What are your concerns? Here is the groups who want it. How can you facilitate that happening? And when you take it systematically like that, in campaign mode, on a front foot, amazing things can happen. So here we are, 10 years later, there are now 3,000 community food growing spaces that have been facilitated locally. There is a confident army of people. I don't really like to use a military analogy there, but a set of people who are really keen to connect up, grow food. And one of the things I find really exciting in that as well is that among that cohort, people who are not just doing it for a hobby, but that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But some of those gardens are now integrating those gardens into healthcare. They're working with their GP surgery to say, why not do referrals of nice volunteering opportunities for people who've got long-term mental health problems? Because actually pills aren't going to work in the end, but connecting with other people might. And getting your hands into the soil is one way to feel good about the world. Absolutely. Some of those gardens are also doing things like training people, giving them apprenticeships to move towards becoming horticulturalists. Our city needs a lot more vegetables than will grow in 3,000 gardens. But what we really need are the people who will grow more vegetables and then match them up with larger areas of land so they can run horticultural businesses and make a living out of it, not just a hobby out of it. Nothing wrong with hobby, but we need volume as well. So now we've evolved our work with community food growing into talking to London's outer boroughs, well, actually, local authorities all over the UK, about saying there's a bit of land on the borders of cities, which in the old days, in hundreds of years ago, they were market gardens. And they were part of a circular economy of returning compost from the city into the soil in order to create good, fresh produce that didn't have to travel too far and was grown by local people and making good jobs. It's an old-fashioned idea, and it's becoming a modern, connected idea again, is to make that land available. And we've got Glasgow, we've got Bristol, we've got London, Enfield, people looking at ways to make that peri-urban land, semi-urban land, available to communities who want to go to that next stage, who want to grow food at volume. Make that land available, make sure there's some premises on it, make sure there's water available, make sure that it's connected in to the trading systems. So that's where I mentioned at the beginning, I'm part of Growing Communities, which is a trading scheme for locally grown, agroecologically grown fruit and vegetables coming in from farms and also from some of these peri-urban areas to say, where is the flow of our food coming from? How are we trading that fairly in a way that really works? What kind of trading schemes would work to manage seasonal produce rather than, just-in-time deliveries? Because actually it's just-in-nature deliveries that we want. So Growing Communities, one of the proudest things that's happened in the last 20 years within Growing Communities is we set up a wholesaler. I never expected to be able to say that. We're setting up a wholesale business that is already managing to deliver into organic box schemes across the city who are making sustainably grown food affordable to local communities by connecting up through all the amazing friendships and connectivity that happen within the food system when we do these things right. It's the most generous sector. It's the most impassioned sector. It's the most wonderfully connected, convivial sector. And I really welcome people's involvement in that. Because I want to question what is living in a city. There's that lovely T.S. Eliot poem about, you know, when the stranger comes and says, why do you live together? What are you doing in this place? And I'd say that there are big questions to be asked post-COVID, post-Brexit, in an age of climate uncertainties, in an age where we need to restore nature and fast. And the questions are something along the lines of, what are we going to eat? How are we going to live? How are we going to eat together? How are we going to make sure that the way that our food is produced and how it's delivered and who to is fair, is climate friendly, is nature friendly? And I'd say that there are some people in the movement, some of them in London, some of them in other cities in the UK, who are doing it already. And it's blooming wonderful. And if we could only help them in the right way, well, think about what cities do well. First of all, we consume a lot. So we could shift our consumption to this kind of food production. Won't all be grown in the city. We must connect with the farmers as well. But part of growing food in cities is to care about it and to see it right on your doorstep and not be distanced from it, not rely on it being delivered by an HGV the whole time, if there are any. So that what else are we good at in cities? We're very good at marketing. We're very good at organising things. We're quite good at IT systems. We're quite good at needing things to be well organised to manage around our daily lives. Well, all of those things can be about values-driven food trading systems connected up to the people who want to put their lives into really good food production. And my, oh my, they're wonderful people when you meet them. And really make those things work. Help with the business models, help with the premises. Michael mentioned at the beginning that one of the things that Sustain does, this is our logo here, is to run the Real Bread campaign. That's been going now for 10 years, and it's helped see the resurgence of people interested in baking bread, not only at home, which is a wonderful thing to do, and lots of people have got back into it during lockdown, obviously, but also in small bakeries, the kinds that were on every street when I grew up. You know, I remember one of the most beautiful things about my childhood was going shopping with my grandmother and going to places where the person who'd made the food was right there and you could have a chat with them. What a wonderful way to spend a morning, especially with your grandmother. She loved chatting. That's who we are. We are sociable beings. So those Real Bread bakeries that we're supporting, thousands now, are being supported by their community, a community who understands the value of well-made food by somebody who's going to make a decent living. The same thing should be true of fruit and vegetable production. The same thing should be true of the animals that we eat. If we're going to carry on eating animals, even in a climate-constrained world, then those animals should be raised really well, and that we should be connecting with the farmers to enable them to grow those animals really well and in a way where they can afford to do so. And that isn't through a supermarket supply chain which is squeezing down on prices at every turn, because the farmer in the end can't afford to do the kinds of things we now need them to do for climate and nature, which are both, as we must remind ourselves, in an emergency state. So if there's one thing I would ask everybody to consider doing, it's to get involved in the food that you eat, not just by purchasing and not just by reading the label, but by getting involved in some way, whether it's through food growing, whether it's through a trading scheme, whether it's through offering your time as an accountant or as an organizer or as a marketing person to a food scheme that needs your help, whether it's as a landowner who can liberate some land for people to grow food on, whether it's as somebody who could nag your local authority or your local MP to get involved in this as well, because there's lots that decision makers can do. We all have a part to play in this transformation. And if you know somebody who wants to run a food growing space, run a Real Bread bakery, get their hands dirty in the soil, then let's help more people do that, because it is the most wonderful way to live. And hey, it also turns out to be rather a lot lower carbon than the life we're living now. So all in all, as my lovely friend Carolyn Steele often says, who is the most wonderful writer about the food system, is that food is the stuff of life, the staff of life, and it can also help change the world. So welcome to that journey if you're not already on it, and we would love to have this conversation. I wish I was here with you in person, because we would immediately go off and have a chat about it properly over possibly a glass of wine and have some uproarious laughter at the same time, which would be jolly fun. We will do that again, my friends. Michael, I shall hand back to you.
Yeah, so Kath, a few weeks ago, I came across a company called Oddbox, which actually is now advertising massively on London Underground, which is a box scheme selling wonky and surplus vegetables and fruit. And you can sign up for fruit and veg, or fruit or veg, fortnightly or weekly, medium, small or large. And I opted to go for a medium box fortnightly of mixed fruit and veg. And it's really exciting. Every other Sunday, it's delivered between 12 and 6 in the morning by bicycle, I think.
Oh.
And it's put outside my house on a table in the garden. And I come down on Monday morning thinking, what is going to be in it? And it's really exciting. Have you got any thoughts about exciting food projects that particularly catch your attention?
Well, first of all, can I say about that advert on the Underground, one of our proudest achievements over the last couple of years is to get junk food advertising kicked off the London Underground. So we worked with the Mayor of London and Transport for London to say, why can't we use those spaces to be promoting the kind of food and lifestyle that we'd all like to live, and not just have our children confronted by junk food marketing? I use that. It's a highly technical term, junk food, isn't it? I can give you a definition if you like, so we help work on the sort of criteria for that. But what I love is the fact that actually the advertising industry didn't just pull the adverts, they changed them to other things, like promoting the odd boxes, like promoting different ways of doing stuff. And we've had some free advertising on the Underground to talk about things like community food growing, which is amazing because it's a public service, isn't it? The Underground, and it's owned in public spirit. So Oddbox, great, how wonderful. How did it ever get to the point where we thought that wonky vegetables had to be separated out and sold in that way? That's beside the by. I'm so delighted that you now have a relationship, I'm sure you always did, of enjoying the arrival of food and being creative in what you do with it.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the skills we've probably all lost, isn't it? To be able to buy a ready-made means that we haven't got a relationship with the ingredients. So the relationship with seasonal eating is to go to the cupboard and say, what shall I make tonight? Not to go to the cupboard and say, I want to make a particular thing from a recipe book. Therefore, oh, I'm missing this ingredient, therefore I must immediately get it in and then waste the rest of it because I bought it ridiculously. So there's something about that relationship with that box arriving. You are saying you're buying it with values, bless you, and being able to use the wonky veg, which would otherwise go to waste, because waste food is a waste of everything that went into it, and eat well. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, it's sad that they're going to waste in the first place, is what I'd say, because some of the box schemes we work with, and you said about what are my interesting schemes I see, there's a whole set of people who do box schemes a little bit like that, where they've integrated the wonky and non-wonky veg, and you get both of them. And they are pretty much waste-free supply chains, which is a massive claim, but I've seen it in action. So box schemes inherently use all the produce. They divide it up and send it out to people. They also have a relationship with the farmers where they say, oh, can you stop growing that thing that's not that popular? Can you shift your production to something other? Because during that season of the year, we need more of this kind of stuff. There's more of a conversation in the supply chain about what's needed, matching demand with production. And that doesn't happen in some of the supermarket models. I'm not totally against supermarkets. I don't mean to give that impression. But what I mean is they are inherently wasteful because they are just having to have shelves full of stuff, and some of that will go to waste because it must look like the most extraordinary fecund, display of everything, and they can't afford to have empty shelf space. Whereas when we interrelate with these values-driven supply chains, as I call them, they are inherently less wasteful because they are matching the demand with the supply, and the conversation is kept up, and the fairness of that conversation is kept up throughout. And these are schemes that have been going for 10, 20 years now, and I'm really proud of them for how far they've got. If people want to look up, there's a network called Better Food Traders, and that is a kind of collective of these kind of schemes who are trying to change the world through food trading.
Okay, any particular other schemes you'd like to just mention before we move on?
I would love to also say all of the food growing schemes, and I mean a combination. There's what are they? Some of them are about community food growing, so that is literally maybe in a social housing setup where people have got access to their front garden, a communal front garden, and then the food growing space is the one where people can meet together and there's wonderful connections and conversations happen while picking runner beans or while planting tomatoes or whatever it takes. Some of those, there's pretty much one in every borough, more in the outer boroughs and fewer in the inner boroughs for understandable reasons in terms of land access, where there is something larger going on, something like Sitopia Farm in Greenwich, something like Sutton Farm, community farm down in Sutton. There's a site in Barking Dagenham, where the local authorities made larger areas of land available for community use. Actually, Sitopia bought the land from a farmer, so there's different types of relationship. But those larger units are really interesting spaces because they are then using trading schemes and community volunteering and connecting in with services, like, for example, giving work placements for people on a lower income or who've been out of work for a while, getting people back into jobs, connectivity, trading, all those things. So these larger farms are really quite interesting. And as I say, we have this fringe farming project working with several cities around the UK, including some in London, looking at where those larger parcels of land can now be made available for very amazing use of skills, love for the land, love for fruit and vegetable production, and linking into trading schemes, which are absolutely the way cities should be going. How ridiculous that we don't know where our food is coming from at the moment. How ridiculous that we don't make opportunities for jobs for people who are on the edges of cities being able to do that. And how ridiculous it is that we waste so much carbon on long distance transport and refrigeration when we could grow it a bit closer. So in the midst of all that ridiculousness, let's clear the space, literally in some cases, and start growing the food there. And there's an army of people wanting to do this. So connecting them up, using the skills that we have as city types to make that easy. Build the trading schemes, make the money available, help people get a shed if they need it, help people get some donated spades if they need that to start things off. Appropriate scale loans for horticulturalists to get into business. It's very hard to get that from a bank. There must be other ways of doing that, whether that's crowdfunding, whether that's through local authority grants or whatever it takes. This is really fun stuff.
Yeah. So the thing I like about Oddbox is they make it easy and they make it fun.
Yes, exactly.
And their communication with their customers bonds them together, bonds us together with them.
Absolutely. And they've done it with values. Isn't that nice? It comes by bike as well, because you can probably have a chat with the cyclist, not sure at 6 a.m, but there's something about putting the pleasure of the human connection back into this as well.
Yeah. So I want to move on to Paul next. But before we do that, I've been trying to connect with George Lamb, who is stuck on a train coming from Glasgow or somewhere. And I'm not sure if Lucy, who works at Grow, will be able to get online. I've given her the link, but she's not on yet. So here's a plea to her, if she's listening, please get online as a speaker. And I've sent you the link. Paul, just a little bit of introduction. I think I was traveling by bus down Dalston Lane, is it? And I saw this thing called the Farm Shop, and it immediately intrigued me because I wanted to know what it was. So I knocked on the door, went in and had a look around and met Paul, one of the founders. I should also say that many years ago, I was in Washington, DC, and I was passing by in a very posh street, and there's this brass plate called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And I knocked on the door, and a bearded gentleman appeared, and he said, just wait 5 minutes, I've got to finish the harvest. Because he too was experimenting with growing things in the basement, on the rooftop, in window boxes, and all sorts of things. The farm shop also had an animal somewhere. And I think, Paul, I'd really like you to concentrate first on that before going on to your other food and sustainability enterprises.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michael. That's brilliant. Could you enable screen sharing, please, so I can share some images of what we got up to a number of years ago?
I think that's the conduit.
I'll sort of get started
do
by,
that.
okay.
Share screen. Wait a minute. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Let me email them.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Actually, my email's not working for some reason.
Paul, I just wanted to say hello. We're neighbours.
Hello, oh, nice one.
I'm a Hackney girl, so it's very nice to meet you.
Right. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I'm well aware of Sustain's fantastic work, and actually, when we started this experiment many years ago, we were one of your capital growth spaces.
Yeah, well, I remember a really wonderful event one night where we held it at your farm shop.
That's right.
Where lots of people were just sharing their enthusiasm and stepping up and saying, I'm the bread maker, I'm the egg producer, I keep pigs in the city. There was a guy who I think was doing mushrooms in a railway arch. And it was all these lovely people who were using space in this wonderful, wonderful way of seeing the city differently through food. So thank you.
Absolutely.
An ancient thank you.
Likewise, indeed. Yeah, it was. Well, I thought I'd provide some context for people as well. When Something and Son is a art organisation, so we work, I guess, on the intersection between sustainability businesses, so ideas that last and have durability, and also taking over empty spaces to address the issues that excite us, which are social and environmental challenges of our time. I suppose, as you'll see for our projects, we very much have an experimental approach to our work. We don't start projects with any sense of where we'll end up, more in terms of a playful exploration of the ideas. And that's what led us, I suppose, back in 2009 to launch this unusual project, which I will now talk you through. And Michael, I think that's now enabled screen sharing, so thank you very much.
Okay.
Just bear with me. Share screen, and this will hopefully start working. Great. So yeah, we are Something in the Sun, and this is an introduction to Farm, which was the work that in 2009, from 2009 to about 2015, we were exploring a body of work around urban agriculture, driven by many of the things you've heard about today. I wish to see a city where people can feed themselves. Many of the fantastical ideas of the time around vertical farms that could occupy sites the same size as skyscrapers, and those inspired us to give it a go, I suppose, and see what was possible in terms of technology. And this obviously was before, and those of you who are interested in subject, before there were any commercial farms in the UK that were using vertical growing methods, before there were any indoor farms in the UK using lighting, and it was very much our attempt at learning and inspiring through that learning process other people and many of the people who visited this project early on have gone on to found now multi-million-pound urban farms, and that's been a nice impact that we've had simply through an experimentation process. So this is the shop that Michael mentioned. We took over an empty shop in Dalston as part of an arts funding project to revitalise the high street, and we approached it essentially with a very simple mission, which was to explore how much food we could grow in a shop. And this was our original call out, our original founding document. And for a very long time, this is all we had. We didn't have anything else apart from this poster. And you'll see it says the latest technology, the oldest techniques, hydroponics, aquaponics, pigs, chickens, growing as much as we can in the shop in Hackney, mushroom cinema, vegetables, and experimenting. So this was our call out, and actually we released this on Twitter at the time, which even then was a fairly new platform, and asked people to come down and help. And just this very, very simple call out, and this simple idea of growing food indoors in a shop, attracted a huge number of people on our opening weekend to come down and help. And I think that taps into very much what we've heard earlier in terms of the talk. that there is this innate wish from people in cities to connect both with their food and with nature if given a chance. And so we, at this point, when they all came down, we didn't actually have any food growing. We just had an idea, and a community built up around the shop who essentially helped us bring it to life as a hub for experiments around urban agriculture. We had people. Yeah.
Can I interrupt, Paul? We can only see something on Sunday introductory page.
Oh, no way. Oh, really? Okay. Well, let me try. Does this change what you can see now?
That does, yeah.
Okay, we'll try it this way. It's probably, okay, I'll take you through. So this is the original shop, and just to catch up where we were, this is an early article, which again was asking the question of how much food can we grow in the shop. And this is the poster that I was mentioning earlier. So I'll give you a little second to dwell on that. And as I was saying, when we released this poster, huge numbers of people came down and were just, I guess, intrigued about what does it mean to grow food in a building at the time. They'd never seen anything like it. And it's fair to say at the time we were the only project of its type we understand in the world that was exploring the indoor environment and a small urban setting like this to look at growing food. And this was the shop in Works, which you just missed that picture. And this was a visualization that a local architect who joined our volunteer community made of chickens sitting on the roof in the very early days of the project. But we had to very quickly then switch from the ideas and the concepts to the reality, and we started shaping the building around us. And most importantly, doing that with an incredible group of volunteers. I'll say one other sort of key element of Farm Shop was that whilst we were interested in the future and technology, it was the people and their time that sustains our ideas. And very much true to many growing projects in London, these aren't commercial enterprises. They're enterprises born out of love and born out of politics and born out of a wish to see a different city around them. So we continued our processes with some of the indoor spaces, and ultimately and eventually, after 4 or 5 months of hard work, we were able to create interesting systems like this, which is an aquaponic system indoors using fluorescent lights to grow food. And if you can see in the corner next to where the person is sitting, you'll see tilapia fish being farmed. This was a system that we built in the front of the shop facing onto Dalston Lane. And we were farming about 300 tilapia, which are a type of freshwater fish. We were farming crayfish, and we were using the wastewater from those fish to grow plants without fertilizers, all in an indoor environment. And I can touch on that a little later if you want, but you can see with the right care and the right skills, you can start to grow successful crops indoors, which is now, of course, a commonplace activity. At the time, we were the very first importer of LED lights into for growing food into the UK, using a pioneering module from Philips. And of course, the most important is the food growing is in the eating. So alongside the agricultural experiments, we ran a cafe downstairs, which was, very much farm to plate within a matter of moments, right in the middle of the city. Another element of Farm Shop, which we felt was very important, was play and fun. So we used to run club nights surrounded by lettuce. And when people would come in, they would leave often talking about or sharing stories of the fish they'd seen, or the crayfish that had crawled out of the tank in the middle of a gig, or the kind of the lettuce that they'd never known could be grown indoors at the time being shown. Similarly, this is a talk and presentation done in the Polytunnel on the Farm Shop. It was important for us to, I guess, demonstrate old techniques and new techniques at once, provide that contrast, and I guess educate people who visited Farm Shop that you can grow in soil, or you can grow in these newfangled technological ways. And we learned a huge amount about the contrast in those approaches over time. I'll talk very sort of quickly on this, but essentially, soil is resilient, and soil is an incredible resource to grow food in. We found that when we grew outdoors in soil, we'd have far fewer crop failures. We would get, I suppose, a more interesting mix of growing, obviously with nature and wildlife and insects occupying the food growing spaces we created. Whereas where we grew indoors, whilst the productivity was high, those systems can often be very unstable. So if they're not in completely controlled, hermetically sealed environments, when diseases or bugs take hold, they spread very quickly through those types of environments. And I think in many ways that was kind of it is a metaphor for the ecosystems and the landscapes we choose to create in our world. Do we create complex, biologically sophisticated, interlinked landscapes to grow food, or do we create monocultures? The monocultures need lots of chemical and active management around them in order to produce food. And what was so special about Farm Shop as a place and a hub is it became, these conversations were constant. So every weekend there were 20 or 30 people just talking about the growing of food. You saw the tank of fish earlier. We had a taxi driver drive past, pull up, and he'd been told by someone that walked by that we grow the same fish that he used to grow in his village in Bangladesh. And he came in and started observing our fish, and he could tell us which were male and which were female, and how quickly they were growing. And I think that when you create a place like this, you actually unlock all of that, the diaspora in London that exists, which has a close proximity to agricultural living, is incredible. So both from recent waves of migration, but also from rural to urban migration within the UK itself, there is a huge wealth of knowledge around agriculture living in cities. And most of us are only 1 or 2 generations removed from agricultural production being an important part of our daily lives. We found that coming out in abundance at Farm Shop. People were constantly popping in with knowledge and experience about how to grow food. And by creating this honeypot of ideas right on the high street in a kind of cool, stylish, interesting way, a fun way, lots of people got very, very interested in it. And we started to, I think, inspire other people. As someone's picked out, there is indeed the person speaking in the background is Colin Tudge, who is a fantastic advocate for real farming in the UK. So my next picture here is actually one of our experiments, which is a chicken coop on the roof, and we are very kind of keen to show people the realities of farming at the time. Some of our experiments made people uncomfortable. We farmed fish in tanks. This is long before veganism became popular. I've been a lifelong vegetarian, and then just through this project became a pescatarian. But like here with chickens growing in a relatively confined space, we were at the same time labeling these exhibits to demonstrate to people the comparisons between this and how most of their food is grown. So the space standards we used in our fish farming felt very, very densely packed to people. There's too many fish in that tank. But it was only a tenth of the densities that you find in commercial fish farms. Similarly, when we had maybe 4 or 5 chickens in a coop this large, many people would describe it as cruel. Yet in the same time, they would walk home, buy eggs, which were even in free range, would have far, far smaller spaces than this to live in. So it was also an interesting kind of attempt to demonstrate and reveal the realities of commercial agriculture at the time. And from that moment on, commercial agriculture has only become more dense, more sophisticated, more technological as it's developed. So I want to kind of pause there, because this was the experiment within the building. Alongside it, we had some interest. We had workspace for food businesses upstairs, and many, many other experiments. We grew mushrooms. We tried, 20 or 30 different ways of growing food over the course of the project. But then from this point, we then started looking beyond our space and trying to understand how we could help other people grow food. This is a project with an organisation called Better Health. Again, this happened around 2010. We worked with a mental health charity to grow basil hydroponically within an old building, and we measured the health outcomes of the participants. So we worked with service users of the charity who were looking for interesting and stimulating things to do, and essentially, they were very what was interesting here is whilst the amount of food grown was relatively small, as it often is with these experiments, the welfare impact on the participants was very high. Plant care is a very enjoyable thing to do. I mean, I was at one point something of an expert of growing in these sorts of environments, indoor hydroponic environments. And you need to start off with a good seed, and the good seed turns into a good plant. And if you get that bit right, if you look after things when they're younger, they tend to turn into beautiful, strong, tasty plants later in life. And that act of care was very motivating for the people we work with. We also went on to experiment more with outdoor and mixed agriculture. This is a vertical farm wall that we built for the 2012 Olympics. Again, very successfully growing very high densities of high value crops, basil, softleaf herbs, Thai basil, things that would otherwise be imported. And we sold these to local Vietnamese restaurants as an experiment. And you can see the kind of quality and the density of the crops, which is possible using modern techniques. Again, at the time, this was the first example of a form of agriculture like this in the UK. It's now a very well-known typology. It's being done in warehouses across the country. And I'll talk a little bit on if I think that's a good idea or not a little later. Our thinking also evolved in terms of greenhouse design. This is the greenhouse that we developed at Capel Manor, which is a farm on the outskirts of the UK, of London. And it uses the cleanest, it's the very first polytunnel in the UK to use ETFE, which is a super clear tunnel film. And it replaces the kind of murky greenhouse coverings you may often see in these lightweight sheet structures. This was actually so clear that a dog ran into it one day and injured themselves because they ran across the field and went whack back into the site. But there's another element of this which is we found quite interesting as an experiment. This is actually a rocket stove, which is buried underground. So each line of crops, we've heated the root ball through biomass rocket stove. You can get far greater productivity from crops if you heat and keep the roots at a steady temperature of 18 degrees, which becomes very difficult in the winter months. So this was an experiment on two things. One is, can we grow more crops by using a different film covering? And also, can we increase yields by heating the floor? And it's been an ongoing experiment for them. They reported very high crop yields, higher than their other greenhouses in the first 2 years of the experiment. And it was a huge endeavour ourselves building something like this in this way, because it hadn't been done quite before. The reason we're interested in a polytunnel structure rather than a traditional greenhouse is it's a fraction of the capital cost, and it's something that normal people can build themselves. So we built this with a small team of 3 people with no professional equipment. And again, it is perhaps a footprint or a model for other people to grow food. Another playful experiment, this was very much on the art side of our work. We were commissioned to build to grow our own fish and chips on the rooftop of a school in Folkestone. And this was a very playful experiment where essentially you could walk through these doors and we were farming fish, growing potatoes, and growing mint to make tartar sauce and other sauces. And we here pioneered or started to explore a vertical growing system, which I'll talk about later, which was essentially our attempt to get this balance right between using the sun and natural systems to grow food, which we've done for centuries, and using fossil fuels, which is what all of the LED farms you'll see on the internet are doing. Essentially, they're saying we don't need the sun, we're going to use electricity and we're going to use energy to grow food. And they tend to be very intensive, hermetically sealed environments. Sure, they can deliver you a lettuce all throughout the year, but they're also directing large amounts of electricity away from other core needs like hospitals, steel production, things which is actually really hard to replace the energy load in. So we've kind of, I guess where we've ended up is we think, the perfect farms of the future will be a combination of both. They will be intensive, they will be highly productive, but they will also be using a combination of sunlight and electricity to grow the crops year round. And that has important food security issues as well. I mean, if your supply chain is shorter, as COVID has now proven, in many ways that can make your country more resilient. It can make your locality more resilient. And it's certainly been the biggest test of our food system in history. So you'll see this is essentially, this was a system which uses both LED and sunlight to grow food in high density. I'm just going to end on a project where we took these same ideas to Istanbul. We were approached by an art collector with a space in the centre of Taksim Square, which is an incredible hotbed of activism in Istanbul. And we were asked to essentially recreate the energy and of Farm Shop, but we had a bigger budget and in many ways a completely different context. The first thing I'll say is that on landing in Istanbul, we realised that the issues of displacement of agricultural communities and the loss of farmland to real estate are universal. And when we first launched Farm Shop, we had people from all around the world asking if they could set up similar projects in their cities. I think that disconnection with food and that wish to be, have soil on our hands and eat things that we understand persists. And all cities have experienced rapid urbanization. So almost always losing farmland, including the peri-urban farmland, and replacing that with offices and residential areas. And it was the same in Istanbul. People were fighting to keep gardens from developers that had been used for centuries for food production. And we worked on a project in a building where essentially we were aiming to grow food. It was a more commercial experiment than Farm Shop. And we went about building and developing systems where there was truly a farm to plate restaurant. This was again in 2014 or so, 2015. And this space became, like Farm Shop before it, a hub for urban agriculture enthusiasts, a meeting point for produce to be dropped off by other urban farmers in the city, and generally I guess a project that highlighted the potential of micro-urban farming in all cities. And that for us, I guess, was a really, in many ways, it for me and my interest in this subject, it is something of a full stop. I'm someone and something inside this organisation that constantly moves on to explore and other projects and other environments that are of interest to us. We may restart our interest in urban agriculture, and we have a few ideas on the go. But I just want to end with a kind of a prototype that we designed for what we think could be the most perfect farm. But it's a very playful experience. I'll show you that animation. I'll talk you through it, which will probably, hopefully, shed some light on some of the issues around this intensive agriculture and different approaches that exist out there. So this is a concept that we had essentially using low-cost, is that playing? Low-cost polytunnels. One of the first issues you have with any indoor growing environment is heat removal, heat management, and making sure that you can keep a crop comfortable throughout the year. So we looked at putting heat exchangers in, insulation that could go up around the greenhouse in winter. So in the summer, the greenhouse would be able to stay cool, receive sunlight, but in the winter, when those light levels really aren't strong enough to grow things like lettuce, herbs, and imported crops, we would introduce an insulated layer. This system also is aquaponic, so we will farm fish for sale, trouts, which produce the nutrient mix that then flows through the plants. When it flows through the plants, it's then cleaned by the plants themselves and returns as a clean liquid to the fish. That means you need no imported fertilizer, and essentially you can run an efficient closed loop form of agriculture. You also see here that we're able to get very high crop densities in this model. Water drips through those towers, and as the sun moves over and touches different parts of the greenhouse and different parts of the crop, the LED lights respond. So we experimented and tested a model where essentially each of the crop layers would react to how much sunlight was on it, and it would increase the brightness of the LED lights based on the natural environment that we found. It's not working very well. But essentially, this would be a model where you could grow food anywhere in the world, just with a feedstock for the fish, and with obviously a technological investment up front to be able to grow intensively in this way. It's a test run. You can see we've prototyped almost every element of this idea, but we've not done the full prototype yet, and that's something that are interested in exploring going forward. So, Michael, I'm going to end there because I'm sure you've got lots of questions. I haven't touched on my new space, Mission Kitchen, but essentially it's a giant shared production kitchen in New Covent Garden Market for producing food and not growing it, producing it. And we have actually a huge terrace here, 6,000 square foot, which we will be looking to turn into a Mission Farm, and rekindling some of these interests that started for me 10 years ago.
Yeah, so I'm going down there tomorrow afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to it. Just a couple of questions, Paul. In the chat, someone says, what about light pollution and what do neighbours think?
Yes, interesting. So with the farm on the school roof, it was in an art festival, so people were in a forgiving mood. But obviously, where you have large intensive greenhouses, they are often located and carefully screened in order to not create light pollution. If you flew over the Netherlands or southern Turkey, you would see that the whole area is ablaze with horticultural lighting. And in fact, most of the tomatoes we eat in this country are grown through a mixture of sunlight and artificial lighting now. And over the last decade, the colour of those lights and the colour of those greenhouses would have shifted from a kind of an orangey glow to the purpley glow you see today in some of my pictures. And that's through the transition from halogen bulbs, which were very inefficient, hugely inefficient way of growing food, through to LED lighting, which is spectrum specific. So the LED lights, they're purple because that's the colour people have identified is needed by plants to grow. So lighting itself is an interesting deep dive subject if anyone cares to go into it.
Yeah, and then one final point is that one of the things that the Farm Shop did was reach out into the community and encourage people to grow at home in their back gardens, windowsills, etc. Can you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think because we had a physical location, a shop that anyone could pop into, which was pretty unusual looking. We would often find people would go past on the bus, or as Michael did, just pop in, and they'd come filled with ideas about how to utilise small spaces within their own homes or balconies or even indoors. And so we had a team on hand who would constantly share ideas. You could walk around the space and see prototypes and examples, much like a mini version of something called the Cat Centre in Wales, which is a place I visited as a student, which is called the Centre for Alternative Technology. Essentially, that's an area you can walk around and see ways of greening your home. Well, this was the same for urban agriculture. You could walk around Farm Shop and be inspired by seeing different versions of food growing in a very unusual way. So absolutely, that formed a big motivation for the people who came off the high street. We also did a lovely project at the V&A where it was called the Seed Exchange, and we got allotment holders from around London to come together and exchange seeds, and that was a wonderful moment because suddenly we had about 200 people from allotments around London meeting for the first time, and then they were trading like a stock exchange. They were trading different seeds that they'd collected or kept from their own allotments. So I think absolutely physical spaces devoted to ideas rather than just commerce are really important to bring people together and collectively problem solve.
Did you do anything with schools?
We had school trips coming in, we did. We often found it quite challenging to work with schools because of their particular health and safety needs at the time. We're quite a small space, so we weren't always able to occupy those schools. But yeah, we must have had 20 or 30 school trips visiting over the course of the time we were open.
Yeah, so I get really excited by projects like this, and immediately I see them, I start thinking about, could it be franchised? Could we create something like this in other communities as a resource for both education and food growing?
We would love to.
Segues into Barnet, and we've got Lucy, who is working with the Grow team at Totteridge Academy. Totteridge was a failing school at one stage, It's in the middle of nowhere. It's about 25 minutes walk from High Barnet Tube Station. But it's also next to the Green Belt. It's got a 6-acre field owned by the council immediately next door to it. And George Lamb changed career from a Channel 4 superstar to an urban food grower to create the GROW program, which is linked very closely with Totteridge Academy and the students, the parents, and the community. Lucy, would you just like to say something about it?
Yes.
Put on the spot at the last moment.
No, that's okay. Thank you, everyone. Can you see and hear me? Yes, great. Yeah, so sorry, George is on the way back from Glasgow and on a delayed train. So I certainly am not the expert and or have the tales that George has, but I'm the fundraiser for GROW, and I can tell you a bit about us. So yeah, as Michael says, we are a community farm that is in Barnet, and we've got 6 acres next to the Totteridge Academy. We're using about a third of it currently in terms of a market farm, producing vegetables, herbs, fruits, flowers. Got some beautiful flowers next to me here. And alongside creating produce using agroecological processes and principles, we use the space as our kind of inspiration education hub for running programs for young people about food growing, sustainable living and outdoor learning. We do that with small groups of kids, usually disadvantaged children, but we work closely with schools in the area, namely the Totteridge Academy, and the kids come out to the farm and they get stuck in terms of all the sensory elements of growing, so getting their hands dirty, smelling, tasting, touching, and the kind of output is always that they are outside, their mental and physical health really benefits from being on the farm. And then, you know, as everyone has said so far, that kind of trying to bridge the disconnect between where your food comes from and what it looks like and what you're used to, and kind of being challenged with different coloured tomatoes and different shapes tomatoes, and understanding that you know, things can taste really different, but to be brave in supporting that. George always kind of knew that his focus needed or wanted to be within education, so that he could talk to young people at a pivotal time. So we work mostly with sort of year 5 to year 9 children, where everything else is happening in their lives around them, but actually to reconnect them to nature, and for them to understand about food growing is a great way for them to kind of think about different opportunities in employment, different opportunities in how you spend your time, and kind of how interesting the whole kind of industry environment is. And that is always kind of overarched with the environment and climate change. So, you know, everything we do, all the practices we have on the farm are sustainable, and the way we grow and our approaches are really, really kind of well thought out and planned to make sure that we're kind of setting a really good precedent and example. And we have a really kind of holistic approach to our programs. We start every lesson with a breathing exercise. We try to kind of reconnect the children. We encourage kind of conversation questions: why, how, what, where. We've got chickens on the farm. We've got about 40,000 bees. We do sustainable beekeeping, which is amazing, and kind of we're working hard to change the narrative on bees for children, between children and bees, and how incredibly important they are. And just this week we're doing a holiday program with a group of kids who are access free school meals, and so they come to us for the day, and they what did we do yesterday? We dug up old sunflowers. We planted some rainbow chard, some spring onions and some parsley. We did a bit of kind of forest free time, playing and tree climbing, and then we cook a meal for them, a hot meal for them, using produce from the farm. A good kind of asterisk at this point is to say we work with chefs in schools. So at Totteridge Academy, the produce made on the farm is put into the school meals every day. So it's just kind of really reinforcing that kind of that message for the children. They might have a grow lesson outside, might be talking about kale and learning about kale, and then we see them again at lunchtime in the canteen, and we say, you know, that's the kale that, you know, that was on the farm, and they're like, what, really, miss? Yeah. You know, the reinforcement that has to happen for them to really connect those dots is amazing. So we like to be able to really kind of create that full story for them to understand that. But for us kind of to develop and scale, our kind of model is to be able to create packages or programs that can go into other schools that won't have 6 acres next to them. That's, you know, that's we realize how lucky we are in that situation. But I think that links in the urban element and the different ways you can grow, the more creative industrial ways you can grow. And for us to be able to help and guide other schools to have a whole school approach to food growing and sustainability. And that's what we hope to do. And yeah, I think that was a good ramble.
So I'm urging you to create a study centre for urban food growing in your car park.
Yes, that's Michael's pushing for that. We'd love to.
Because as schools say they're going to go net zero,
yes,
one of the things they don't add up into that is the travel to school by staff or by parents. And they should, because they're not really net zero. So one of the things is to put pressure on schools to make a different use of car parks. And whether it's shipping containers to grow fish inside, or an urban studies centre adjacent to the green belt, because you can't build on the green belt, so the car park's the only space.
Yeah.
So that's something I'd be really keen to push you to do as a resource for other people, because I think we need to be sharing things much more.
Absolutely, yeah.
And bringing people to see what we're doing. How do you engage with parents and the Barnet community?
So we run quite a few kind of community events on the farm, hosted on their farm. We just had a pumpkin event. It's our first time growing, having a big pumpkin patch. And so we had about 100 families come through it's a free event, and we host various activities for the young people. And, you know, when they're picking the pumpkin, there is that kind of storytelling of, you know, that's been grown here and how it got to that point. And, you know, and we don't just have round orange pumpkins, you know, we've got squashes, we've got gourds, we've got loads of different styles. And that's been a really great way to engage the wider community. Parents, it's really interesting actually. We run a weekly stall every week in the car park at Grow, and selling the produce. And we also have just started our veg box scheme. So we have kind of a scalable sort of pricing system for small veg box and large veg box. This year it's gone really well, and next year we hope to kind of triple the amount of families that might want to access that with us. And certainly the school, as Michael said, the Totteridge Academy was failing quite badly previously, and actually now when there's children and families writing why they want to attend the school, Grow, you know, has a high percentage of people reasons why people want to attend the school, and giving not just disadvantaged groups, but all children, you know, at that tricky age, like year 6 to year 7 transition, year 8 up to year 9, giving them that space, that freedom, that hope within non-academic subjects for them to really connect to the outside and in our case, food growing and learning about that. And what we're trying to really do at the moment is build some case studies around in how families and individuals have benefited from it, because we have great anecdotal kind of snippets of wonderful information. A girl in year 7, well, she's now year 8 actually, telling us that she'd asked for a compost bin for her birthday, following a lesson on composting with Grow, and her parents being kind of turning their nose up a little bit in the beginning, thinking, oh no, we have to have a smelly bin inside, but then her reiterating why it was important and why it meant so much to her. That's just one example, but it's fantastic. And for us to be able to talk to young people, we really want them to be able to go home and communicate things that they've learned and they feel passionate about, that might make some changes within composting, recycling, getting a raised bed, growing something on your windowsill, all of that stuff. But yeah, the community around us is wonderful, and we are now working with not just schools, but with other groups in need in the area. So we've got a group of we do a Saturday group with children in care. They come to us weekly. They're doing a 10-week program about food growing and sustainable living. And we're working with a local Somalian group and an Afghani group, and we've got loads of different partnerships happening. So we know we have this asset of the farm and the resource, and also these wonderful Grow facilitators who have this kind of way of teaching and this kind of approach to learning about the environment and food growing.
So if anyone has questions, please post them. Kath, would you like to just say something about the importance of education in terms of all of it?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where we all agree, don't we, that children should be introduced to this, and it baffles me why it fell out of the way of doing things. When I grew up, when you hadn't finished the meal on your plate, somebody would encourage you to eat the food, or it went into the pig bin, and then we went to see the pigs who ended up eating the food waste. So we learned about the circular economy by doing it. And I'm a food waste campaigner now. So the education worked on me, isn't it? So we need all of our children, mine included, in Hackney growing up. They've just installed a wonderful garden in my daughter's school. She's 7 years old, and she's coming back and going, Mummy, did you know that tomatoes grow on plants? And I'm like, really, darling? I had no idea. How wonderful. But she's also eating them now, where she wouldn't eat them for me, but she will eat them for the rather wonderful boys who are in her class who she's beginning to get a crush on. This is the stuff of life. This is how we learn. We learn to love it by doing it. And you don't learn to love food by learning about it from words. You learn to love food by having a great conversation over a really beautiful dish, or by meeting the chickens in Paul's wonderful rooftop. I've met your chickens, in your wonderful rooftop space. I'm sure you won't mind me saying that those chickens aren't producing enough eggs for London. That's not the point of them. The point of them is that as they cluck at us, we go, blimey, it takes a lot to feed us, doesn't it? We must think about these things. And given that food is the biggest employer in the UK, so most of the children that are coming through the schools will end up working in food in some kind of way, why are we not introducing them to loving it so that they can love that career rather than it being treated as a low-grade career? Why can't we be saying to them, we're really going to value those jobs and you're going to be being paid properly for them and you're going to enjoy them? So at the moment, we treat it as a bit of a dead-end kind of career where you're going to be treated rather badly and you're going to have a terrible relationship with chickens in a terrible factory. Well, that doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be like that. Not if we make land available and we pay for our food properly and we connect with it and we make it joyful from the school right through into the jobs. Because those kids, my 7-year-old is going to be grown up any minute now. She's going to be a teenager soon. What sort of message will she get about her career in that, and whether she's confident to require a piece of land to be given over to community use, confident to lobby her local authority to say, actually, that piece of land that you're using as a golf course for a few people should actually be being used by a whole bunch of people, including this school, for the next generation of people who are coming through, so that they can enjoy it too. And I think if I'm here to say anything, it's about us squaring up our shoulders a bit and saying, hang on a minute, how do we want the future to be? All of these projects are utterly wonderful. And as you said, Michael, how can we make sure it happens everywhere? How can we make sure that people have access to the resources, have the confidence to ask for it, know what the barriers are, and know that somebody else has overcome those barriers? Like I talked about with the access to land through our capital growth project, it turned out that by talking to the housing associations in a different sort of way, they were well up for it. But they'd said no to all of their communities before because they were nervous about it. They didn't know what it would be like. They didn't know whether marijuana would be being smoked around behind the bike sheds. They were worried, like we all do. We worry in advance, and that prevents us doing things. So people often see me bouncing along, being enthusiastic. I bounce partly to go, this is all possible if we are confident and joyful about it, and also bring the business case with us, and also bring the case studies of where it's worked, and also bring along the person like Paul or like anybody from your wonderful Grow project to say, we're ready to do this. Then land becomes available, premises become available, money becomes available, probably not at the right scale yet. So that's where I also talk about ambition. How can we set ourselves the kind of ambition that you take to local authorities, the kind of ambition you take to big landowners, the kind of ambition you take to investors, the kind of ambition you take to politicians, and say, do you want to come behind something really big that you can be photographed with in a few years' time? Because it'll be really amazing. We were working with, as I say, 3 mayors on the trot. They didn't trot, but you know what I mean. They were Ken Livingstone, Boris Johnson, now Sadiq Khan. You can't think of more different people in some way, but they've all, when you frame it in the right way, come behind food production, sustainable diets, procurement rules to make sure that the right sort of fruit and vegetables are being bought and that children are being fed better food. We can get people to understand who are in power to be able to liberate the land, the educational systems to be able to do this. But you need a sort of city-wide vision if we're talking about feeding the city as well, because you have to have also the relationship with farmers. So I see those chickens as fabulous, diplomats for the wider food production story. They can't express it, obviously, but Paul will do that. Paul does the translation of chicken language into human being language, reminding us how, if we are expecting to eat eggs and vegetables in the future, that's all got to be done in a way that makes sense for the food producers, whether that's the animals or the people who produce our food. And yes, of course, it starts with education, because that's going to be the biggest employer for those kids when they come through into adulthood. Bless them. So it's incumbent on us to be making those jobs better as well, easier, better, good jobs, so that it is an attractive profession in which we can live out health and sustainability and joy. Never forget the joy. Without the joy, food's a bit boring. We can make it a joyful experience for more people.
I think one of the key points that struck me was that Totteridge Academy now is able to attract more pupils. It's more popular with parents because of Grow. And I think that's a really interesting message. I've got a question for Paul. Do you have any idea of the life cycle emissions to produce, e.g., a lettuce in a polytunnel versus being produced in the standard way? Just wondering how compelling the technology is from an ESG perspective. And P.S., terrific presentation.
That's very kind. I can definitely talk around that point without specifically giving you the up-to-date data. A polytunnel is just a covering on a crop. So essentially what a polytunnel will do in a country like the UK is extend, or a northern European country, is it will extend the growing season by protecting the crop from the weather. And then you basically will irrigate using pumps and other things to keep that crop growing. Most lettuces that you find on the supermarket shelf will be grown in covered environments, often in Turkey or southern Spain, using hydroponic media and a cover, simply to control the weather a little bit, protect from crop damage, protect the crops from damage from pests, from wind, from rain. So most soft leaf crops are grown within controlled environments, of which a polytunnel is one. In terms of, I guess, some of the other projects I've shown, or examples I've shown, we did do our own life cycle assessment with a third party at a university at Farm Shop. And in terms of the comparison between indoor growing with 100% lighting in comparison to crops imported from countries which are hot and can grow year round, the indoor growing was atrocious. And I'm concerned that this new future that's being painted of indoor controlled environment crops being part of our sustainability language, it is I'm highly skeptical of it, because we did our own study, and you can do your own calculations on the wattage of even the most efficient LED lights now, and it uses a huge amount of energy to grow food. If you compare that to the transport emissions of an articulated lorry with refrigeration coming from Turkey, that is a fraction of the energy used to grow the crop in the UK. But of course, sustainability is a multidimensional, intersectional issue. So whilst there are pros in terms of resilience, we can grow crops in our country, within our borders, things that when a crisis hits can help that population sustain itself or recover or be resilient. That is different to the climate challenge. And the climate challenge, from my own experiments, that an indoor automated growing environment is an unsustainable way to grow food. There are some really exciting projects in the Netherlands where they have connected systems, clustered indoor growing environments, polytunnels, growing lettuce alongside waste heat from power plants, using non-plastic growing media, collecting rainwater, and using solar panels to power those lights. But you have to do a hell of a lot to replace the sun in a sunny part of the world and popping that on a boat, or popping that even arguably in an aeroplane. So I would say that those forms of agriculture, intensive, lit, covered environment agriculture, from a carbon perspective, in my opinion, it makes most sense to do that with high value, short lifespan imported crops. So the crazy situation, I can walk down my road in South London and find soft leaf crops which have been exported from Vietnam. Now those are crops that could very easily be grown in controlled environments in London. They'd be better, and that's where you would see the carbon benefits come to the fore, where crops are being airlifted from one country to another for next day freshness. So that's where I would be targeting our controlled environment growing sector. And there, from the studies we did, there are savings to be made, modest ones. Many people would argue that we should change our diets, not change the food we grow, and that we should, if we want to use our seasons to grow food, we should change what we eat. I'm of the view that with a multinational city with many different forms of food culture, I think that time has probably passed. I don't think it's okay politically to tell people what to eat, and I don't think it's necessarily okay to encourage people to leave all of their culture behind if they wish to have Vietnamese herbs because they're Vietnamese. I don't think we can really tell them that's not okay. And so I think we are part of a global food system now, and we need to find the lowest carbon way of doing many of these things. So it's a very long answer to a very quick question, but it's complicated.
Yeah, it sort of links to a question from Danton. Is there any calculation of how many cubic meters of indoor space and kilowatt hours of energy and fish food, I assume fertilizer and other inputs, is required to generate enough food to sustain a person in the UK? It's a bit like, how many trees do we plant to offset our living emissions?
Yeah, I think I could talk another just general observation on that question. Very hard one to answer up front. I'm sure someone else has done that research. And I must stress I'm an artist and I'm trained as an engineer, but I mostly do this in a very playful, experimental capacity. But one thing that gets missed in this whole indoor agriculture story is that no one's growing protein. And of course, protein is what sustains the majority of life and well-being. And people aren't growing fat and protein. There very few people are using in urban farms, which are seen to be the technology that solves the future. Very few people are growing even carbohydrate. They're growing flavor and vitamins. Soft leaf crops, which are high value, can sell for direct to consumer £80 a kilo. The people running them can make money, but are they really going to solve the food system, the crisis of the food system and food supply by growing lettuce? Well, no, clearly not. You know, the food that sustains people, the food that takes people out of malnutrition is high quality proteins. And high quality proteins are incredibly complex to grow. You know, even the most sophisticated fish farms, where you're growing grubs and insects from waste food, and then you're feeding those waste insects to the fish to grow the high quality protein that you can sell in the shop and people actually want to eat. Even those, you have to feed the insects with high quality protein. So you have to feed them with ground up fish. So all you're doing is you're creating a better supply chain, but you're absolutely not solving the critical issues that are that, you know, in order to grow high quality proteins in life, you need high quality feedstock sources, and those require land. They require, you know, many ecosystems to sustain them. So no one's yet created this the perpetual motion machine of food, which is lots of people are promising, but no one's done it yet.
Okay. So I want to sort of wind up because we're coming towards the end of our time, to say that an enormous number of really exciting projects. I go and visit some of them, and I'm really excited by what I see. And I think, you know, it's up to each project to define itself, how it sits in the food system, how it sits as a sustainable enterprise, and how it's going to solve the problems of the world, including climate change. I'd like to make a suggestion to Kath, which I will do again tomorrow, which is that our little attempt this year as a Grow Festival to encourage sharing of ideas, can we work with Sustain to do something on a much bigger scale and have a Grow week or month of visiting projects and focusing on...
wouldn't that be wonderful?
So,
and the quality of conversation that one has in a space like Pulse or like Pro or in a school garden is so much better, because you start to go, I can be part of this. Yes. And that's the point.
So I'll talk to you a bit more about that tomorrow.
Fabulous.
There is money available for projects. So the Conduit Connect platform invested in zero carbon farms, which uses the Clapham tunnels to grow greens and soon mushrooms. And they've now raised enough money to go into an industrial building. So they're doing something on an industrial scale. I'm connected with something called LEAP, which is the Loans for Enlightened Agriculture program. And it was inspired by Colin Tudge, amongst others, and his wife, Ruth West. And we make loans for earlier stage enterprises, but our funders, some of them require us to be a little bit cautious in what we support. I'd support anything and everything given the chance. But there is money available for enterprise projects in this space. And I think there's increasing interest in all of that. So if any of you have any projects that you want funded, do get in touch and we will give you some advice on whether we can support them or not. As I said, tomorrow we've got a pitching session at Mission Kitchen where 3 projects are going to pitch for up to £10,000 of loan finance. The one I particularly liked was one doing baby food in frozen packages. So I thought that was a bit different from anything else that I'd seen. And there's another that's working with refugees, and a third which is producing granola and other stuff from reclaimed food. But it's a really great time. And I think that COP26 is going to show that there's a lot to do in terms of how society has to change. And given that food represents about 1/3 of global carbon emissions, and given that we are suffering diabetes, obesity, and all sorts of other things because of the food we're eating, I think it's time for a change. And I think we change by creating solutions, marketing them to people in an affordable, exciting, and fun way. And I'll get back to Oddbox, because I think they do all of that, which is why I'm such a keen advocate of it. Also, they're very generous because they have sponsored our zero meals at restaurants by providing free fruit and veg to the restaurants. thank you all for coming. Thank you, speakers, for speaking. Thank you, Lucy, for fitting in at the last moment, despite all the problems of joining. And I hope to see any or all of you tomorrow night at the Conduit for a live event, which will be a solutions-focused event. So we're going from the ideas that we've been talking about today to maybe collectively proposing and coming up with ideas for solutions, and then seeing if we can find a way of getting a group of people behind those solutions to make them happen. There's a free glass of wine, and the Conduit Club is really, really nice. So do come. It's at 6:30 tomorrow night, 6 Langley Street, Covent Garden, just opposite Covent Garden Tube Station. So thanks, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us. George, do get unstuck. Kath Rosen, do get, well, we'll see you tomorrow. And your colleague, do get well. And Kath, Paul, and Lucy, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.